Hey everyone, welcome back to the RTS Guided Programming Coaching Call. Got a program modification question heavy call for you this week. So we're going to jump right into things and get a lot of these questions sorted out. Got a bunch of reattacks from questions from last week too, which is cool. We're trying to deal a little bit better with situations like that. So as always, open to feedback. Love to know what you guys think of this call. How your questions get answered, etc. So starting right off with the executing the workout questions. This first one says, I was hoping for a little more rest time post-contest. So not really a question so much, but it is something that came up that I wanted to address. A lot of people that are post-contest are a bit surprised to find that we kind of roll right back into training the following week. Now, if you are traveling or something like that and you need to take most of that week off, I'm totally understanding to that. Take the time that you need. Try to get back into the gym when you can, though. We don't want to lose too much momentum. Now, for most of you, once you hit one of those big peaks and you have a major contest, we're not going to roll you right into another loading block. We're going to roll you into a restoration block or maybe a hypertrophy block or something like that. You'll be able to tell those just because the character of the training is different. There will be little or no contest lift style lifting, so if you're in, say, restoration block, you may not train the contest lifts at all. If you're in a hypertrophy block, you may train them once a week. And there will be a lot of stuff that you don't otherwise do. For instance, in a restoration block, you'll see more rows, more rotational work, and things like that. If you're in a hypertrophy block, you'll see things like myo reps, again, more rows and things like that. The non-loading block training, the restoration hypertrophy blocks, they're still important. They may not drive your lifts up right away and directly, like a lot of us are used to thinking about training, but it's still important because it allows us to see those gains later on. So, yeah, by all means, especially if you're beat up post-contest and you want to take a few days off, that's totally understandable, and I'm fine with that. As soon as you're feeling up to it, though, get back in the gym and let's start building our momentum a little bit more. Another question that came up that I can't quite recall right now if we address this later in the call or not, but something that came up anyway. If you're doing contests out of phase, basically you're doing train through contests that are not, peaked and tapered for, then yeah, the expectation is that you're going to pick up training on Monday, that you're not, there's no time off. There's no, there's no restoration component to those. Those are trained through contests. And now that I think about it, I do think that we address this a little bit better later on in the call. So we'll come back to that. Next question up says, if you can only work out Monday through Thursday for a given week, is it better to train 4 days in a row or skip the priority 4-day? Excuse me. Or skip the priority 4-day and go Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday? In a situation like this, I tend to follow the heuristic of making hay when the sun shines. I grew up kind of in a more rural area, and that was an actual thing that people said. If you're gonna bale hay, then you do it when you can, because if you put it off, then you never know when it might be raining, and you just can't do it. So, similar idea here. I want you to get your training in when you can. So, I would say start out with the expectation that you're going to train 4 days in a row. So you train Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday if you can, and then Thursday if you can. And maybe you get all 4 of them in a row. Or maybe by Wednesday you go, man, I'm smoked and I need a day off. So then take it. And then you train priority 3 on Thursday and you skip the priority 4 workout. Or maybe you do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and by Thursday you're smoked and you skip the priority 4 workout. Or maybe your recovery is going well that week and you make all 4 days. You don't really know until you're doing it. So try to do it so that you can fit as much in as you can, and that's going to be fine. The only concern that, and I think it's the concern that you're feeling on this, is that putting your priority 1 and 2 days back to back. That's not a big deal. Most of the strict templates that we write for people in performance coaching, a lot of them follow a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday approach, where they have something similar, where the Monday, Tuesday workouts would be what we would consider to be your priority 1 and 2 workouts. So, yeah, try to get all 4 days in if you can, and if you can't, then that's how the priority system works. It allows you that flexibility. All right, next question says, for pin squats, do you possibly have a technique video? And we actually do. So let me see if I can share this with you. Here's a pin squat video. It says this is me doing pin squats. So as you can see, we take it out of the rack just like normal. We walk it out. The pins are set at the bottom of the lift. So you squat down, set it on the pins, and drive it back up. That's pin squats. All right, next question says, what is a push press? Push press is, think of push press like a standing military press, except you're going to incorporate a little bit of leg drive. We're not talking about a jerk like you would see in weightlifting, but you're using a little bit of leg drive to help you push the weight overhead. There are numerous online tutorials for push press, and I'm sure any number of them would be fine. I don't have one that I use as a go-to, and truth be told, it's not at the level that I want you to do it at is not a terribly complex concept. It's the same thing as a standing military. Just use a little bit of leg drive to push it overhead. Make sure that you're bracing your core, that you're really engaging your abs. That helps the transfer of force from your legs through the upper body a lot better, because if your midsection is squishy, then you lose some of that force in the transfer. So if you've never done a push press before, you may not know what the heck I'm talking about. You will after you do it a couple times. Just keep that in mind, that you're trying to transfer that force from your legs through your midsection into the barbell. Yeah, and same thing as a standing military, just using a little bit of leg to get the movement started. Next question says, with good mornings from pins, should the bar start on the pins or make it like a pin squats and do the eccentric down to the pin on rep 1? You should do it like a pin squat. You should take it out of the rack, you should walk it back, and you should have an eccentric component to rep 1. All right, that just about does it for our executing the workout questions. Now, as I promised, we have a litany of program modification questions. So let's go on and dig into those a little bit. First up says, a couple years ago, I suffered a herniated disc in C6, C7. The disc pressed against my nerve root and caused my left tricep and chest to become very weak. For a while, I couldn't even do one push-up. I had surgery to clear the impingement in July of 2013. Since then, I've been progressing back and benching around 265 pounds. My left arm is still much weaker than my right. There's still some noticeable atrophy on the lateral head of my tricep. I feel as though the other muscles are compensating, but my bench has still never been the same. Do you have any recommendations as to how I could improve this deficiency? Well, I mean, I'm no expert in this area, but usually when we see deficiencies on one side or the other, um, they correct themselves over time to an extent. One thing that you can do to help encourage that process, excuse me, not sure why I'm yawning so much today, but one thing that you can do to help encourage that process is to incorporate a bit of bodybuilding work, especially stuff that's using dumbbells. Try to isolate that muscle, get that muscle working, and train at the capacity for the weaker muscle when you're doing these isolation type movements. So you mentioned triceps. Let's say that you are using some dumbbell tricep movements to try to restore some activation on the weak side. Maybe you can use 20 pounds on the left and 30 pounds on the right. Well, use 20 pounds for both, keep things symmetrical and even. You're trying to restore the activation. So I would try to do that. Make sure that you're paying attention to technique. Excuse me. Make sure that you're paying attention to your technique. You want to make sure that your technique is symmetrical and balanced, and the right muscles are engaging at the right time as well. That's going to be a big driver into your progress into this problem over the mid and the long term. And also perfecting your technique, at least on a basic level, is going to reduce your risk of injury, which, I mean, I don't want to say like your risk of injury is higher because of this left right imbalance. Everybody has left right imbalances, but the bigger the asymmetry, I think the bigger the risk. So making sure that your technique is on point is going to help reduce that asymmetry. It's not necessarily even like a muscular size asymmetry that I'm referring to, but like a technical asymmetry. So if say your left elbow is out and your right elbow is tucked, or vice versa, that kind of asymmetry is really what I'm talking about. So making sure that your technique is on point will help keep you healthy. All right, this next question is a reattack on last week's question. We had a question about a lifter who could basically tolerate the competition with benching once a week and needed to do all their other benching close grip. And we got a little bit more information on this particular situation. So this additional information: one time weekly competition bench, the rest of it's close grip. This is because of a shoulder injury that flares up with more wider grip benching. It's not something that's necessarily fixable either. My thoughts on a situation like this. So you've got a situation where all the wide grip benching causes shoulder pain. If you do some that's narrow, you can bench without shoulder pain. And something else that you mentioned in the past that's led to some kind of mixed results in terms of your bench progress. Sure. I mean, I would expect that to some degree, that if your competition grip is wide and you can only train wide in a limited context, that's not going to be great for your progress. So yet you can't really do a whole lot about that, so you're going to need to train close grip so that you're avoiding, shoulder injury, shoulder pain. So you're doing what you can in this sense. I would just make sure that you're pausing clearly and pronouncedly. Make sure that your pauses are long enough, and I would try to rely on those pause lengths help you drive your bench progress. Like you mentioned in your email, as long as you've got plenty of volume, you're pausing your lifts, and you're doing some shoulder work, I think you'll be okay. I would also add into that, stay as close to the competition width as possible without getting yourself into trouble. I wouldn't go super narrow just because. I would stay, if you can go pinky on the ring, then go pinky on the ring. Do as much of it as you can. Now, don't get yourself into trouble by, going wider than you should for longer than you should. Also, last week we had a question about a large squatting fluctuation. This was basically an issue where we had a lifter who, let's see, in one training session, their squat would be up by quite a bit. The next session, it would be down by quite a bit. And it was a large fluctuation too. I want to say bigger than 10%, maybe not quite 15%. So quite a large fluctuation. Now, we got some follow-up information on that too. And just as I suspected, it was not due to obvious things like sleep and, poor preparation or something like that for the training session. I figured you would have noticed things like that. You did mention that your lower back still feels fatigued, and that similar programs have resulted in similar fluctuations. And you're wondering if maybe you should be placed in a different training group. I'm hesitant to place you in a different training group, especially if this training group is working well for you in terms of your bench and your deadlift. If you're seeing large fluctuations in the squat, if you're not seeing great progress in the bench or the deadlift, then yeah, we need to probably switch your training group, or at least switch your training program to some degree. So let me know that. But assuming that you're getting pretty good results from your bench and your deadlift, you're just seeing these large fluctuations in the squat, and considering that it seems to be tied to recovery, at least to some extent, I would say the first thing that you need to do is to try to reduce your squatting volume. What I would do for that is just reduce the drop sets. Goodness, it's rude of me to continue yawning like this, but there's not a lot I can do about it. The first thing I would do is to try to reduce your volume. I would cut out 1 to 2 down sets from each. Cut 1 to 2 down sets from each squatting movement. Okay, so that should substantially reduce your volume and substantially reduce your level of fatigue. And we should see those fluctuations damp out a little bit. It may not take them out completely, so let's give this a good 2 or 3 weeks and see what happens with your squatting. If you're seeing less fluctuation, let me know, because that means we're on the right track. If you're still seeing those big fluctuations, let me know that too, because we'll have to put our thinking caps on as far as figuring out what the answer to this problem is. Next question says, I bought a safety squat bar as it was a price I just couldn't refuse, but I'm just wondering if it detracts from the program to use a different bar from time to time, except for competition squat. Tomorrow I have tempo squats, and I was curious about using my safety bar. I would prefer that you did not change the bars. Don't change the bars, just outside what's written in the program. The bars selected in the program are selected fairly specifically, but I understand that you got a new toy and you want to play with that. So if you want to use it for tempo squats this week, that's fine. I wouldn't use it for tempo squats all the time. What I would use it for is front squats. Front squats and safety bar squats tend to be pretty close pairings. And especially if you don't like front squats, I would just swap them out for safety bar squats. Also, I'm not sure I would do the safety bar with a slow tempo today. Just do safety bar squats and you should be fine. All right, next question up says, I did something to my knee on Monday, which was reminiscent of an old injury. Knowing what I know about the last time I sustained an injury to the same knee, I elected to back off my priority 2 day, which would have been deficit deadlifts this week. My knee seems to be feeling better, so I wanted to know if I should restart tomorrow with priority 2, coming off from 3 days of rest, or move to priority 3 and call that day a loss. I would go into your priority 2 day and let that be the focus. That's the reason why it's there. That's the reason why we're using these priority numbers, is so that you can make sure that you're hitting that work that's the most important. So if you're going to miss something, make sure that you're missing the lower priority days. This question says, today was a deadlift day, and it was horrific. Wow, horrific. As I planned to hit a single at an 8 with no issue, I simply could not handle the planned volume of 9 sets of 5. I got 2 sets before simply hitting a 10 RPE. Wow. Last week, I just about managed the 8 sets of 5, with the final few sets being real grinders. I have no issue with high volume of bench. I can't really gauge my squat as I'm working back from an injury, so basically working up to pain-free RPE. However, I simply can't handle the high rep sets on deadlift. I could have done a single another few times, no problem, but there was no way I could have completed all planned sets. How do I adjust this going forward? I'm definitely not afraid of work, but I simply couldn't complete the session with so much volume. Okay, well, the first thing up, and I want to just clarify this for you and for everyone else, it is 9 sets of 5, not 5 sets of 9. If you were trying to do 5 sets of 9, that could explain why you couldn't finish the session. If you're talking about, taking a 10 rep max weight and doing 9 reps with it, that's a very intense, very effortful, high RPE set. But if you're taking a 10 rep max and doing 5, that's not, and 9 sets is still a lot of work, but it's more doable. Now, so I'll just throw that out there and let that kind of stand on its own. If you've got this issue where you were reading the numbers in reverse and doing high reps, doing 9 reps when I really wanted 5, try it the other way around. It might solve your problem. Now, with that said, it may not solve your problem. And we do see this from time to time. It's not often, but occasionally we see somebody who, when we're programming these percents, the percentages need to be individualized a bit, and now most people fall into this normal range, but then we always get a couple outliers who need those individualized percents. That's not really practical in this setting. So what would be better in a situation like this, where you're a little bit not volume tolerant, you're a little bit fast twitch in terms of your ability to tolerate reps, it would be better to just put you into a different training group. I think you'd see better results that way. So my advice goes like this. First, let's make sure that we're doing the workout as prescribed. And I don't mean that to be condescending, but this is a problem that we see a lot, is that people read the sets and reps in reverse. So it's 9 sets of 5, not 5 sets of 9. So if you're doing that correctly and still seeing the problem, then let me know, and we're going to place you into a different training group. It's not a problem. It's not good or bad. It doesn't reflect on you in any way as a lifter. It's just that some people have different capabilities. So if that's not your capability to do the volume work as prescribed in this training group, then we need to find another training group where you can thrive. All right. Next question says, my elbow has been giving me pain for a while. I've been fighting through it, but I'm not sure if a low pin press is going to be too much. I'll give it a shot, but if it's worse than regular benching, what's the best substitute? Something like a half board press? Actually, yeah, you're right on. If you don't or can't do low pin presses, the best substitute will be a half board press. If that's not an option, let me know. Again, we'll have to think about that a little bit more. If we're crossing off pins and half boards, then we're probably getting into pause stuff, which gets pretty redundant for most of these programs. That's all the program modification questions. We have a few scheduling questions. This first one says, I have a final competition this Saturday, and after that, I'm looking forward to getting right into the actual higher volume work 4 times per week, which I really wasn't able to do peaking for these comps. Should I just go back to week 1? I don't have a comp until February. No, you should not go back to week 1. You should send me your contest date and let me tune the training into your contest date, and that way you get the most appropriate training for where you are in your meet prep. Next question says, when is the next round of dates for guided programming peaking for? I'm trying to plan for a meet coming up in early to mid 2016. Our peaking dates, we've changed this up in the last couple months, and you may have missed it, but what we're doing now is it's kind of a rolling 6 months. So anytime in the next 6 months, if you have a competition scheduled, send me that date and I'll get your training tuned up. It's not like we're opening up the way we used to do it, where we were opening up dates at certain times, and on this date, we're opening up through the end of September and so forth. That's gone. We're training up through 6 months from now. Anytime within the next 6 months, if you have a contest coming up, send me that date and I'll get you peaking set up for it. And it's not just peaking. It's not like we spend 6 months of our training just peaking for a competition, but it's part of the overall annual plan. It'll develop you into a peak. Next up says, I'm creating a game plan for the next competition and wondered about your thoughts. My next definite meet is May 28th and 29th, and there's nothing in the calendar in February when I expect we would normally have a test day. There are a couple events in January, full power doubles. Yep, that's 2 reps per lift. Otherwise, to IPF rules competition on the 16th. That's just 35 minutes away from me, so it's super convenient. I guess I'd probably train through for that one. Another one on the 17th, it's a qualifier for a different Fed. That's the only other drug-free Fed in the UK. That's 2 hours away, but even training through, I'm pretty sure I could hit the qualifying total for my weight class. That would allow me to compete on February 28th in the British full power unequipped, which I was thinking may be better timing for our plan. It's 2.5 hours away, but that's manageable. In this situation, what would you err toward? I'm not emotionally attached to competing until the May competition. I'd be happy enough with just test day, but I'd be interested to know what you think and what would be best for my development as a lifter. If there's what's best for your development as a lifter, I'm glad that you said that. So what's best for your development as a lifter is that we work our way through annual plans and multi-year plans. That's what develops you as a lifter. There are competitive aspects to developing you as a lifter too, but assuming that we're going to compete at certain times, that should get taken care of. So I'm like you. The most important thing to me then is that you compete in this May competition that you've attached some value to. Everything else, it would be fine. It would be fine. If you want to set up a peaking date for any of those as well, that would be fine too, because we're talking mid-February. So you'd have March, April, and May. So about 3 months to peak for your May competition, which should be plenty. So I wouldn't even necessarily train through any of those. Go ahead and train up for them. Send me the date that you want to compete in, and I'll tune the training for it, and we'll get you peaked for that competition. And then after that, we'll get you peaked for the May competition. It should be no problem. just let me know, and we'll take it from there. Let me know, and it's really none of those competitions are especially developmental to you as a lifter. None of those competitions enable you to go to any other competition that's developmental. Well, perhaps unless you're going to qualify and go to the national championships in the other Fed. In that case, that would be developmental. But if you're not intending to go to that national championship to compete, then that's not really developmental either. The competitions that I would consider to be developmental competitions, they're meets that are appropriate for your level of strength. So if you're a state level competitor, if you're competitive at your state level, then going to the state championships would be developmental. If you're competitive at a national level, then going to nationals is developmental, and so on. Also, meets that enable you to go to other meets that are developmental are also important. So, for example, going to nationals, you have to qualify for it. So your qualifier is important, and things like that. Now, if you're doing a meet just for the meet experience and just to move you further down the tracks, it doesn't matter much to me. Personally, I think the doubles competition would be interesting. It'd be interesting to watch, if nothing else. It was also the closest. So, I mean, that would be something to consider since none of these meets are especially developmental anyway. We're really talking what's moving your training forward in the best way. So, again, it's mostly up to you. None of these meets really stand out to me as like that's the clear choice. So it's what's most convenient for you and what sounds like the most fun for you to do. Don't count out the fun factor. All right, a couple miscellaneous questions this week. This first one up says, in my first meet a few weeks ago, I was thrown off by how much time I had between attempts. It seemed to be like a long time. Is there a good way to manage the time around attempts? Not really. And it varies a bit by meet and what the meet directors are doing with the flight sizes and so on. For a lot of you, it will be a lot more time than you're used to in your training. If you're used to taking 3 to 5 minute rest periods in your training, it'll be a lot more than that. Especially if you're in a big flight, with 15 other lifters, then yeah, you're going to have about 15 minutes between attempts, which is a sight longer than 3. How do you prepare for that? Well, you can take a little bit longer rest periods between heavy sets in your training. And to some extent, that's going to come naturally to you as you get stronger. The other thing is to try not to let it get in your head too much. There's very little you can do about it. I wouldn't recommend going back and knocking out a couple other warm-ups unless it's just an obscene long amount of time, like 30 minutes or something like that. But yeah, it's just try not to let it affect you mentally, and that'll be the biggest thing. Keep yourself warm, which is also not usually a problem, but some people like to be warmer than others. So maybe I've seen people with towels and blankets and stuff like that. They keep a towel over their legs to help keep their legs warm. I don't know how much value there is in that, but if it helps you stay mentally engaged, then that's the important thing. So I wish I had some better advice for you, but I'm afraid it's just kind of part of the deal. Next question says, we competed twice in the last month. I'm feeling a bit burned out. I hesitate to take a week off owing to the loss of momentum, but I also have a back twinge. What's your recommendation for training post-comp? Well, I was looking at, when I saw this question come in, I looked up your training to see where you are in your training cycle right now. Normally after a big peak, and I say normally because this is how I operate all the time, after a big peak, I'm going to roll you into a restoration block, which is going to automatically diffuse this type of situation. Your program is not doing that because last week wasn't a major peak. So either these are trained through competitions or the training is out of phase or something is going on with that. So if you could send me an email to clarify what's going on with that. If you need to be in a restoration phase, then let me know because I'll put you into one. that's not a problem. Secondly, assuming that these were major competitions, you don't have anything coming up in the next couple months, let's say, then yeah, you should probably at least take a half a week off, if not the full week. And you probably need to take the full week off for your back to let your back heal up. Beyond that, the restoration block is going to handle a lot of that, the process of helping you get healthy again. Yeah, I need to know where you're at in your competition calendar, and something is off a bit in terms of where you're training, and I'm not sure exactly where that came from. So if you provide me a little background data on how we ended up here, that would be helpful for me. Let's see, where are we at here? Next question says, right now I'm around 25% body fat according to the neck waist measurement. I'll start to drop fat slowly with the goal of ending up around 15%. In your experience, what impacts strength progress the least? To create a deficit in calories, mostly from diet or from extra low intensity cardio? I would definitely err on the side of diet. Start out with diet only. And just see how far that takes you. Be patient and be willing to give it some time. If you're trying to drop fat slowly for, a period of time, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, then take a break for 4 or 5 weeks, then get back at it. Some sort of a cyclic pattern like that, where you're just coming down slowly. Don't crash too fast, and especially for the first couple of months, you shouldn't see any, and maybe the entire time for a guy like you may not see any strength loss. Going from 25% to 15%, yeah, you may not see any strength loss. Now, if you go from 15% to 10%, you may start to see strength loss at that point. But from where you're at, you may see a little bit, but probably not a lot, as long as you're keeping things slow. And to get to 15%, I don't think you would need any additional cardio. Now, if you want to do some, especially since it's a component of your GPP training, I would recommend keeping that up. Keep doing your GPP. But beyond that, I don't think there's a lot to be gained from doing additional low intensity cardio. All right, next up, we got some videos, but before I head over there to open those videos up, I just want to remind you guys, continue to send me videos via some sort of a streaming service like YouTube, Instagram, Vimeo, something like that. We can't download and broadcast the videos that way anymore. So in order to show your videos, send it to me via some sort of a streaming service. And first up, we've got Greg's squat video. So let me pull that one up. All right, so we're going to review Greg's squat video here and give him a technique analysis. Not bad, Greg. Technically, I see a little bit of back rounding, but this is a limit lift, and you're bound to see some sort of technical breakdown. Yeah, I would, in terms of weak range of motion, like most raw squatters, you're looking at the bottom end of your squat. That's what your programming is designed to target, so there's no issue there. Just continuing to follow the program is going to develop your weak range of motion. In addition to your weak range of motion, excuse me. In addition to your weak range of motion, in terms of weak muscle groups, it could be hips, but I'd say since your back rounds, it's much more likely to be a back issue. I would recommend that you keep your supplemental lifts focused on your back and your hips. So doing things like good mornings is going to be beneficial to you. Stuff that targets your posterior chain, especially with a little bit of emphasis on your back, is going to be a good thing. Other than that, I don't see a lot of like serious technical deficiencies, especially considering that this is a limit lift. Nothing that me telling you about it is going to fix. Your setup looks fine. Yeah, everything else looks fine to me, Greg. All right, let's see. Next up we have Olivia's squat. So let's review the video, and then we're going to talk about some background information on this video. This was a solid lift. Solid lift for sure. In terms of weaknesses, just like everybody else, you're losing most of your speed right around parallel. So the bottom of your squat is your weak range of motion. So again, just sticking with the regular programming is going to develop that. In terms of weak muscle groups, you're pretty balanced. So I wouldn't change a lot about how your supplemental lifts are selected. If you wanted to target your quads just a little bit, that would be fine. So take a look at your supplemental lifts, and if you're hammering hips all the time, do something that's going to affect your quads a little bit more. So some things that will target your quads: safety bar squats, high bar squats, even getting into some stuff like leg pressing and hack squatting is not out of the question. Let's see what else. Single leg stuff like lunges and split squats can be helpful. Now, I don't want you to throw in a ton of this stuff. Just occasionally having a little bit of an additional quad emphasis is going to be helpful. Your quad deficiency is not pronounced in any way. In fact, you're pretty balanced, and the case could be made for a back deficiency or a hips deficiency. So that's the nature of being balanced. The good news is that training how we have your training set up is going to be helpful. So in terms of weak range of motion and weak muscle groups, that's what I see. So just a little background information that you provided. You said that you often miss your peak, and you missed your peak in this case, that your estimated 1 rep max from training was much higher than this. Now, let's go ahead and throw out the possibility of the estimated 1 rep max being incorrect or inaccurate. The numbers that you sent me make me think that that's not likely the case. What likely is the case as far as missing your peak goes, I think there's too much of a volume reduction. So if you're training and your training is going well, you are setting PRs and making progress every week in your training, yet we taper and then you go to a competition and your strength is worse. What happened? Well, I think the taper is messing you up. And this isn't as uncommon as you might think. The taper does really well for me on the squat and the deadlift, but it messes up my bench press. So what you need to do is basically you need to keep your volume higher. We need to think about how to do that in the context of guided programming. So when we come up to another competition week, we need to make sure that we're addressing this so that we're keeping your volume a little bit higher. Now, like I said, I need to think about that a little bit more because this is not something that we usually see with guided programming type lifters, but it's something we see sometimes with our performance coaching types. We have the problem solved at that level, but how to solve the problem at the level that you're at, we need to figure that out. Now, it could just be as much as me giving you a different taper week, and publishing a different taper week for you to use, and that would be perfectly fine. It could also just be as much as you adding 1 or 2 drop sets for all of your squat work during the taper week, and that also might work. So give me a little bit to think about this, and let's reattack. But definitely don't forget when you're coming up on your next competition, and we're a few weeks out still. Let's make sure to reattack on this. And I think that there's something that we can do for sure. There's something we can do to keep your volume up during the taper, and I think that's going to solve your problem of missing your peak. That's almost always what happens when somebody misses their peak. It's that the volume was reduced too quickly. You're making progress every week in training, and things are tick, tick, tick up. Then all of a sudden things dip, and the only real thing to change is that taper. And that's a pretty big change in most cases. It's a pretty significant volume reduction. And some people just respond poorly to it. Like I mentioned, I respond poorly to big volume reduction in my bench press, but it's lift specific. It can be lift specific. It can be across the board too. So yeah, let me know. Let me know what you need in terms of for which lifts as well, and we'll get this problem sorted. All right, and I want to pick back up and show Olivia's deadlift. Stand by. All right. So let's check out Olivia's deadlift. If I can get the button. All right. Okay. Yeah, no real complaints from me as far as your deadlift. Your sumo technique is solid. You keep the bar in pretty tight. Yeah, I think that's the only thing that I would say is to just keep working on getting tight in the bottom. That's something that everybody always has to work on. That's kind of a constant that we always see. Make sure you're pulling the bar in tight to your body. You see just a little bit of drift there at the bottom, just a little bit of drift. But I mean, this is minor stuff technically, but for where you're at, that could make the difference between a made third attempt and a missed third attempt. So we're not talking about a huge difference. It's not going to change the world in terms of your pulling, but a made third attempt is a big deal. Let's see. In terms of weaknesses, weak ranges of motion, your flat back puller, definitely weak range of motions off the floor. You'll fix that a little bit as you hold the bar in tighter at the bottom, but again, the programming in general is going to help with that. Hips and low back, basically posterior chain, the programming is already designed to target those muscle groups for your deadlift. So I think you're pretty much good to go on the deadlift. We talked about, now I just remember from chatting with you in the past that we've talked about reclassing you in terms of deadlifting and overall in order to support your deadlifting. Yeah, let me know how that's going, and things should be continuing to improve. But from what I'm seeing here, there's no manual adjustments that you need to make. All right. All right, next up, we've got a couple explanations. This first one says, as I'm coming back from an injury, what are your thoughts on squatting 5 times a week, including the squat training? I would love to know more about what you mean, because you could do that in a beneficial way and you could do that in a really terrible way too. Do the squat training as it's programmed, but if you wanted to do like 1 or 2 additional light sessions of squatting in a week, that would be fine, but I would keep it to 30% and below. Well, keep it to 40% and below. The weight should be light. It shouldn't be challenging. It shouldn't be high volume. it should not be disrupting to your main squat training. But if you're including a bit of a squat pattern in your GPP work, that's acceptable. Next question up says, what's your opinion on blood flow restriction training? Have you seen any benefit from it for yourself or any of your clients? What's the best way to implement it if I want to experiment? I've actually not experimented with blood flow restriction either myself or with my lifters. The closest thing we've done to it is myoreps, which we've had good success with. The myoreps are already incorporated in hypertrophy blocks, and that's how I would implement those. As far as blood flow restriction training, I can't tell you specifically how I would do it. I've had a couple clients over the years who've requested it, and I've worked with them on it, and we almost always include it as a supplemental lift. So we're talking 1 or 2 times a week, you know. The weights are pretty light, the volume's pretty minimal. But in terms of being more specific than that, you know, I don't really know. Just because it's not a tool that we use very much. I don't see a real need for it in general for most of our lifters. Now for injured people and stuff like that, it's a bit of a different scenario, and I could see some use being, I could see some use coming about in a situation like that. But even then, I think you accomplish a lot of the same thing with something like myoreps. And you don't need any special equipment. There's no confusion on whether the cuff's on too tight or too loose. You can also train more axial muscles too. It's not just muscles of the limbs. So that's what I would recommend in terms of blood flow restriction. We do have a couple of victory laps to go over this week. So first up, congrats to Helen Tierney. She says she did a 2.5 kilo personal best for her squat and her total. Down on the bench, only got her opener, but got all 3 squats and deadlifts. Secured the gold on her second deadlift, personal best on the deadlift, or equal to a personal best on the deadlift. She says she didn't want to push her luck as she competes equipped the next day. And yeah, that's awesome. Congratulations, Helen. Personal best and matching personal best when there's a travel component like there was for you, when there's so much going on, and when you're doing 2 competitions back to back, that's awesome. So congratulations. Also, just want to say congrats to Greg. He got 3 new personal best and a personal best total since his meet just 3 weeks ago. So did a meet, 3 weeks later did another meet, PRs across the board. So congrats, Greg, man. That's awesome. Good work. And also congrats to Daryl Neely. He went 9 for 9 in his first meet, and he also secured 4 personal bests, 1 in each lift and a personal best total. Those are over his gym lifts too. I mean, obviously his first meet, so those are now also his meet personal best. Congrats, Daryl. That's awesome, man. Good work. So congrats to all our lifters who competed last week. I know we had a ton of competitions going on all around the world. So congrats to all you guys. And thanks for those of you who sent in questions and sent in your victory lap reports. I definitely appreciate that stuff. That's about all I've got for you guys for this week. So thanks for tuning in and watching. For those of you who are here on the live call, if you want to ask any questions, go ahead and post those up in the box, and I'll hang around for a few minutes and answer those. But that'll pretty much do it for us for right now. So as always, good luck in your training next week. Take what's there and build some momentum. We'll see you guys next time.